In just a moment, we're going to go through those 5 different criteria and see how those each one are present in the Old Covenant, and then we're going to see how each of those are present in the New Covenant. On your own time, and don't forget that in the description link of this YouTube video and on the website at 5minutebiblestudy.com, the study notes that I'm looking at right now in front of me, those are being made available to you so that if you wanted to study this with somebody else, you can take this and share the gospel with them. But as you'll find on those study notes, I have there listed several different minor covenants, as I would call them, between man and man. There's Jacob and Laban's covenant in Genesis chapter 31. There's Abimelech and Abraham's covenant in Genesis 25. And I have a few others listed there. But there are major covenants in Scripture, and I call them major because, again, it's God entering into covenant with man. I have already alluded to God's covenant with Noah. There was God's covenant with Abraham. There was the Mosaic Covenant, also known as the Old Covenant, which we'll talk about very shortly. And then there's the New Covenant. So let's talk about this Old Covenant, this otherwise called Mosaic Covenant in the book of Exodus. What I do is we just write down the token, or rather the criterion of a covenant, and then we read a verse that shows the Old Covenant actually did involve this criterion. It measured up to what we just laid out. I didn't just make up those 5 criterion arbitrarily. I got those from studying covenants in the Bible, and so we see that when we look at one of the most important central covenants in all of Scripture, the Old Covenant. In Exodus chapter 19, we see the oath in part that God made with Israel when He made them His special people in Exodus chapter 19. Read with me. Exodus 19 verse 3 says, "And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell to the children of Israel, You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel." That's a summary of the covenant terms, or the oath that God was making to them, that they would be a special treasure above all people, and they would be a kingdom of priests to Him. And so, there's the oath. God's promising He's going to do this if they are faithful to their part of the covenant. Okay, the second thing we addressed was that there was always a sacrifice between God and man when covenant was involved. So let's look at Exodus 24 to see the sacrifice. Exodus 24, and starting at verse 5 says, "Then he sent young men of the children of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half the blood and put it in basins, and half the blood he sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read in the hearing of the people, and they said, All that the Lord had said, we will do, and we will be obedient." And so they're on Mount Sinai. God has sworn what He will do, and here it's implied that an animal was killed because blood is mentioned, so it came from somewhere. It came from an animal being killed. There you have the sacrifice, and you have the blood specifically mentioned here twice, and they sprinkled that on the altar. Again, don't forget that the blood represented the penalty if Israel broke. If, again, was the condition, if they kept their part of the covenant, then God would do these things. But if they broke it, then the blood of that animal represented what should happen to them. And just the same for God. But as we find out in Scripture, God always, without fail, keeps His covenants. So we have an oath, we have a sacrifice, we have blood. That's also the same verse that we just read, so no need to read another verse. You can also go to Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 18 if you want another testament that blood was involved with the Old Covenant. But number 4, we are going to address the token. Many people don't get this off the top of their head. If you ask somebody, what is the sign of the Old Covenant? Let me just give you a second now. What is it? Okay, I'm guessing that most people didn't get it because whenever I ask somebody that, most people don't get it. So the answer is, are you ready? The Sabbath. Yes, the Sabbath is the token. It was the sign. Like the rainbow was the sign to Noah's covenant, the Sabbath day, every seventh day of the week to a Jew, reminded them that God entered into covenant with them on Mount Sinai. Look at Exodus chapter 31 and verse 13. Speak also to the children of Israel, saying, Surely my Sabbaths you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you through your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you. The Sabbath, again, was a reminder to those Jews that they had an agreement with God. And if they were working on that Sabbath, that told them, first of all, that broke the covenant. Besides that, it showed them that they didn't respect the covenant in the first place. The fifth criterion, again, was the meal, and we'll go back to Exodus 24 to see that. So after they had spilt this blood from the dead animal, it was split in half. Then in Exodus 24 and verse 11, it says this, And he did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel. They beheld God and ate and drank. This is what they did after the sacrifice. They looked at the glory of God in the cloud, and they ate and drank in his presence. That signified that the children of Israel were God's special people, that he had entered into covenant with him, and that he would protect them and they would worship him. Now, if you think about where does this fall into, why is this important to that thief on the cross question? Well, I want you to remember this. The thief on the cross lived under what covenant? The old covenant. Yes. He was saved under the old covenant. And so when we ask ourselves, why can't I be saved by the thief on the cross? It's really the same question as, why do Christians today not keep the Sabbath? Now, I understand that some quote-unquote Christians believe that the Sabbath is still holy and they do still keep it. I believe that they're wrong. I believe that we'll prove that in just a little bit. But it's the same reason that we don't require circumcision of children on the 8th day. That was an old covenant law. It's the same reason that we don't have the laws of bodily discharges that we still enforce today from Leviticus 15. And we don't set up the tabernacle from Exodus and so forth, because that was the old covenant. And so if I'm asking myself, what do I have to do to be saved today? Then I should go to the new covenant. And that was not the covenant that the thief on the cross, as he was hanging there next to Jesus, was living under when Jesus said, I will see you this day in paradise.